The writing style of this book was truly fantastic, and I don't know how else to describe it other than to say that it seduced me. um, Hello, welcome. I've decided that I'm going to start transitioning away from TikTok and short form content to making longer form content on YouTube, and this is the first long form video that I am filming specifically for this app, so I'm very excited. It's going to be a book review, and I'm going to be reviewing Rouge by Mona Awad. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the weird, the confusing. I'm going to talk about all of it. I'm going to start by explaining what I loved, what I didn't love, and then I'm going to end this video by explaining who I think that this book would be good for and who I would recommend it to, because it's not going to be for everyone. I would describe the genre of Rouge as speculative horror. Speculative because it has elements of magical realism, and horror because you feel such a sense of dread for the main character the entire time while reading. It really feels like you're standing on the edge of a cliff. It's the dead of night. There is dark, cold water below you. It's really windy. You have the sensation that you've been followed, but you don't know who it is. And you also feel like they're about to push you off the cliff, but you don't know when or if it will happen. And that feeling is kind of part of the plot of the book. It opens with Belle, our main character, at her mother's funeral. Everybody is telling Belle that her mother died by suicide, jumping off of a cliff and drowning in the cold water below. But Belle thinks that there is something more sinister going on, and she's determined to get to the bottom of it. There are so many blanks and unanswered questions when it comes to Belle's mother, who I'm just going to refer to as Mother from here on out because that's how she's referred to in the book. So a little bit of a backstory about Belle and Mother's relationship. They have a very strained one. Both of them, for the longest time, have been obsessed with beauty and looking perfect, and this has essentially caused them to become estranged. Mother lives in California, Belle lives in Montreal. Belle is a lot more similar to Mother than she might like to admit. Both of them run dress shops, and both of them are obsessed with beauty. Belle is obsessed with skincare and watching skincare videos on YouTube. It has truly taken over her entire life. And it is an addiction, so much so that even at Mother's funeral, she hides in the bathroom to watch her skincare videos. Later on at the funeral, Belle gets some tantalizing clues about what might have happened to Mother, and then this information is followed by a video about a transformative spa experience that will lead you to become your most magnificent self at La Maison de Méduse, the House of Medusa. Belle is then lured to this spa when she puts on a pair of Mother's red heels, and we, the reader, get a glimpse into the cultish vibes within this spa. It's really weird, it's really strange and creepy. Rouge to me is a retelling of the fairy tale Snow White, where the poison apple is represented by the cult that is the beauty industry, which seduces us to our own deaths by forcing us to pursue impossible levels of perfection. Now, with that being said, let's dive into what I loved about this book because there's a lot to say. The writing style of this book was truly fantastic, and I don't know how else to describe it other than to say that it seduced me. Belle's experiences in the spa were written in such an evocative way that both her and I were being seduced by the spa. We both understood that it had a very dangerous side that was kind of behind the scenes and hidden, that was also potentially deadly, and yet Belle continued to visit the spa to get her skin treatments to become her most magnificent self, and I continued to read the book because I was just that desperate to know what was going to happen to her. Mona Awad created such an atmosphere for the spa, and it was truly entrancing. I kid you not, I would sit down to read this book and literal hours would go by without me noticing because I was just that captivated by what was going on. So yeah, I've never been seduced by a book until now, so points to you, Mona Awad, for writing such a unique and interesting story. Another thing I liked about the writing style was how it felt like a dream, and actually saying it was a dream is an understatement because really what it was a fever dream on steroids. But I think that's fitting for a story that is based on a fairy tale that has very dreamlike qualities. I mean, for a good portion of her story, Snow White is asleep herself. Passages with the fever dream-like vibes were interspersed with passages that portrayed reality, and yes, this became confusing at times, but I did think that it helped to show how Belle herself was descending into oblivion caused by the beauty industry. One more point on the writing, Mona Awad did a really great job of showing the reader instead of telling the reader, and I think this allowed for the plot of the book to not be predictable whatsoever. At no point in time did I know what was going to happen, and that really kept the pages turning and kept me reading on the edge of my seat. Another thing I loved was the imagery of red throughout the novel. Usually, I feel like red is used to symbolize blood and death in horror books, but in this one, it felt like it was being used to symbolize madness. For example, there's a scene where Belle goes to Mother's dress shop and she collects all of Mother's red mannequins and she brings them home with her. And she is convinced that they are her sisters. Belle is an only child, and these sisters speak to her and they tell her things that are very clearly not good for her to hear, but she is listening to them and wants to follow their advice and do what they're telling her to do. And in this scene, it really feels like she has gone completely mad. These sisters also really reminded me of Cinderella's evil stepsister, so I think that helped add to the fairy tale vibes of the book and also to the dreamlike qualities of the writing style. I guess the only thing that I didn't really love about this book were the elements of magical realism. There was a lot that was confusing about the story, and for a book that is critiquing the real world beauty industry, I really wanted all of my questions to be given exact answers with explanations that made sense in the real world, but because of the magical elements, that just wasn't possible. By the end of this book, it becomes clear that I guess the owners of the spa are sucking the life and beauty out of their clients to use it for themselves, but how and why they are doing this is never explained, or it's just not very clear. All we know as the reader is that these owners collect the life and beauty of their clientele using jellyfish, and then they proceed to eat these jellyfish to consume that for themselves. So yes, this was very confusing to me, but to be honest, it kind of made sense why this was the case because the story is being told through the eyes of a character who has a very limited perspective and limited information on what is happening to her. And for a majority of the book, she's in a state of mind that really feels like she is using hard drugs. So, of course, there are going to be confusing aspects. Another small issue that I had with the book was the fact that I guess the head owner of this spa was the Egyptian god of chaos, Seth. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love books that incorporate mythology. That is like my whole thing. I'm obsessed with it. But I felt like it was just a little bit too much for this story specifically, especially because there weren't many other aspects of mythology incorporated. I think the only other one was that the spa was called the House of Medusa. Although, then again, I know next to nothing about Egyptian mythology. My specialty is Greco-Roman, so maybe there were incorporations of Egyptian mythology that were just completely lost on me because, of course, I'm not going to pick up on them, and that would make this critique totally invalid. And there were definitely aspects of the magical realism that I did enjoy. For example, Seth visits Belle when she's a child, and this is a flashback scene, and he comes through a mirror in her house to slow dance with her. And Belle is convinced that Seth is actually Tom Cruise and that he's her boyfriend and is in love with her. And the reason that I love this is because it really felt true to the wild imagination that many children have. And considering this book is loosely based on fairy tales, that is very fitting. But yeah, definitely take my negatives of the book with a grain of salt because I'm not really someone who enjoy magical realism all that much. I guess I'm more of a higher fantasy gal. So it does make sense why I didn't love this aspect of the book and why I didn't fully embrace it. So finally, let's turn to who I would recommend this book to. There are three people that I would recommend it to. First, I'm going to recommend it to people who have always been curious about the horror genre but have never yet dipped their toes into it because they don't like gore and blood. I'm the same as you because I want to faint at the sight of blood, and I don't love gory descriptions. And I think this book really sits on the edge of that goriness. You don't really get too much of it, so for that reason, I think this would be perfect for you. Second, I would recommend this book to people who struggle with body image and or have body dysmorphia. I have body dysmorphia, and reading this was a little bit healing, to be honest. It was a good reminder that pursuing impossible levels of perfection ultimately leads to the death of self. It leads to the death of uniqueness and individuality. And it's a good reminder that perfect doesn't even exist. Perfect is defined by billionaire CEOs who profit off of our insecurities and who also invent many of the things that we've become insecure about. And finally, I would recommend this book to mothers and daughters both if you have a strained relationship and if you don't. For a majority of the book, it highlights the competition that often emerges between mothers and daughters, and I think it was really well done. But by the end of the book, there is this really beautiful, beautiful passage that shows that no matter what, there is so much love between mothers and daughters, and they will do anything to protect one another. And I also think this passage showed really well the ways that Belle was healing from her grief and finally accepting her mother's death, and it was just really beautiful, and I loved it so much. If you've read Rouge, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. I would love to hear it. I kind of want for my comment sections to feel like a book club where we just discuss and analyze books because that is so much fun to me. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, please consider subscribing. It would mean so much to me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.